Hi, and welcome to Preventing Workplace Violence. My name is Sarah Druck, and I will be guiding you through this presentation for the next 15 minutes or so. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a message at the end of this presentation, and I will try to answer it this weekend. We will start by just defining what workplace violence is. Workplace violence is a violent act that includes physical assaults or the threat of assaults directed to somebody while at work. Workplace violence includes threatening actions, such as waving fists, throwing objects, or threatening body language, verbal or written threats, physical attacks, such as slapping, hitting, biting, shoving, kicking, pushing, or beating, as well as violent assaults, such as rape, homicide, or attack with a weapon, including knives, firearm, bombs, and guns. Here is a recent news story of workplace violence. As you're watching, if you could take a mental note of how you feel this whole situation could have been prevented.
I'm Erin Kennedy. Today, nurses who are at the center of it are reviewing Payne County authorities. It seems like
Okay. What I found staggering in this news video clip was how the inmate was left unshackled, and there was reports of the correctional officer sleeping and watching TV while he was on the job. What I would like to know is if this had been reported before, if this had been reported to the higher ups and they just did nothing about it, or if this was the first incident that it happened. I think sometimes where incidences are reported, but then it's kind of, oh yeah, we'll get to it. This was a serious issue that had he been shackled the whole time, this could likely have not had happened. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, otherwise known as OSHA, has a set of guidelines for preventing workplace violence, specifically for healthcare and social service workers. They say that these workers are at increased risk of work-related assaults from violent behavior of their patients. Some of the reasons they state: pain, devastating prognoses, unfamiliar surroundings, mind and mood-altering medications and drugs, and disease progression can cause agitation and violent behaviors. If you look up the picture on the top, which I took right from OSHA's their guidelines, it said that 20% of all workplace injuries happen to healthcare workers, while healthcare workers suffer 50% of all assaults. So that kind of just goes to show any position that we're in, we're just at such an increased risk for violence. The author of our book, Sullivan, also cites the following reasons why violence is more common among healthcare institutions. Hospitals have an open door policy where visiting hours are not often restricted. These visitors are often not required to check in when they arrive. Sometimes, or I should say most times, when you're working with pediatrics or children, labor and delivery, the NICU, those situations, the visitors are required to sign in and have a badge. But for our geriatric or adult population, most times visitors are not required. Family is encouraged to be there to support the patients, but we don't really quite have a control over who is there and who is not. Workers are often understaffed, and sometimes even workers are left alone. In the emergency room, there's long wait times, and waiting rooms are often overcrowded. And if one person becomes agitated, it can easily agitate the person next to them, and it can increase from there. There was an article in Emergency Physicians Monthly that stated that those who work in the emergency department are at increased risk of violence. Many of the reasons why we've discussed. And it kind of got me wondering, how protected are we? So that's why I really like this map of the United States here. It shows how protected are emergency care professionals from workplace violence. It's a state-by-state look at their current legislation. If you look at Pennsylvania, that's in the yellow, it states that is a state that provides for some level of felony charges for committing an assault and or battery against emergency department personnel. There are some states, such as Maine, that states extend no protection to any healthcare professionals, to the other extent, where states consider to have particularly comprehensive statutes in terms of covering professions, locations, and circumstances. I think that just kind of makes me wonder if there's not strict legislation against these acts, if that would cause somebody to have aggressive behavior once and have it happen again. In this article, it also said that an emergency department nurse is considered to be the second most dangerous civilian occupation. So it's civilian occupation, not including police officers or firefighters. It was second only to, if anyone wants to take a guess, I'll take a second here. But the emergency department nurse is considered to be the second most dangerous occupation, second only to a taxi cab driver in New York City. I just found that kind of interesting. The effects of workplace violence. The effects of workplace violence can cause physical injuries leading to temporary or permanent disabilities or even death. Emotionally, it can affect morale, increase stress, cause a mistrust of administration, and exacerbate a hostile work environment. Absenteeism and employee turnover affect the staff and administration as a whole. The next 3 slides will focus on preventing violence. There should be zero tolerance policies. Organizations need to display a culture of intolerance to violence and potential assault. Their policies should be clearly stated. It should be specifically stating that anyone who becomes violent or who demonstrates aggressive behaviors be removed from the setting and that security should be contacted. We should also focus on reporting and education. Employees must be educated to recognize the warning signs of violence. Employees should be taught conflict resolution skills and de-escalation techniques. We should also be educated to store equipment properly, such as stethoscopes, hemostats, scissors, etc. I know for myself, I store my stethoscope around my neck. My scissors and Kelly clamp are either in my pocket or in my little bag next to my computer. After having researched this topic, I will definitely think twice about keeping my stethoscope around my neck if I'm dealing with an agitated individual. I should also make sure we educate staff how to regarding how to report incidences of violence, and whom do we report them to? There are the environmental controls. Make sure that we have adequate lighting, especially in the parking lots, the parking garages. Security of the devices. So there should be bullet-resistant barriers in the emergency department. Curved mirrors in the hallway. Escort services if needed. Adequate staffing. Uses of restraints or seclusions for those that display those violent tendencies. And also alerting staff about patients with histories of violence, dementia, or intoxication. There are questions that Sullivan suggests you ask your place of employment. Does your facility have a clear reporting procedure in the event that there is a workplace aggression incident? Whom does staff inform of its concerns? What are the repercussions should individuals report an incident that makes them uneasy? Does your facility offer a mental health support program for staff? Is it effective in helping to reduce employee stress? When someone voices a concern to supervisory staff, is action taken to address these problems quickly? There is a proactive approach versus reactive approach. And Cook and Yaros feel hospitals need to adopt a more proactive approach to workplace violence instead of just acting when a sensible event occurs. Focusing on such large events as, say, an active shooter or hostage situation, most organizations are missing the opportunities to prevent the smaller, far more common incidences of violence. They call for hospitals to recognize the day-to-day aggression and abuse that staff tolerate from patients, visitors, and even from staff to staff. And I like this approach because we focus so much on active shooter, hostage, child abduction, where I don't think we've really too much touched upon, at least at my job, the smaller incidents, the day-to-day things, the verbal threats, what we should do. Dealing with violence. Verbal threats often come before a violent event. So trying to be proactive again, before it actually becomes violent, just taking those threats seriously. Employees should be taught techniques for reducing aggression in people who are making threats. We should remain calm, try to isolate the individual, watch our body language, keep our talk to them, our speech or commands simple, use reflective questioning, embrace silence, and maintain moderation in speech. I like this little picture there because it says note to self, relax. I think that's the biggest thing. Patients, anyone can pick up on our heightened sense of worry, anxious, anxiety. They can definitely pick up on that. So we need to try to remain as relaxed as possible. Another warning sign is to watch how the patient themselves, how they react. So watch while they're escalating, watch for these following behaviors. Clenched fists, a blank stare, a fighting stance, arms raised in a fighting position, standing too close or advancing toward you, holding anything that might be used as a weapon, overt intent if they state that they have an intent to come at you, and moving toward the exit as to block you from leaving. These are all things that we should watch for. How do we handle a violent incident? We need to notify security immediately. If the person has a weapon, we should never try to disarm them. If they are not armed, try to enlist staff to help in restraining a violent person, and try to keep a barrier between you and the violent person. And post-incident follow-up. We need to be certain that everyone is safe following a violent event. Make sure all staff and patients are accounted for. Arrange immediate treatment for those that are injured. We need to complete injury and incident reports because we know, of course, if we don't complete these reports, if it's not filed, if we don't chart it, it didn't happen. Follow with human resources regarding the workers' compensation process for these injured employees. Contact security to determine if a police report should be filed. And we should make sure that we contact the injured employee at home to express concern for the person's well-being and follow up with any questions that person may have. As I've discussed in this presentation, awareness and education are key to preventing workplace violence. It is necessary for all workplaces to have a specific set of guidelines and make sure those employees understand those guidelines in order to prevent and then counteract workplace violence. Thank you all for your attention.